Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Vanishing Children. The Isle of Wight had always been a quiet place, especially the small coastal town of Vintner. Known for its sleepy streets and windswept cliffs, the town seemed untouched by time. Yet a sinister cloud now loomed over it, darkening the lives of its residents. For weeks, children had been vanishing, one by one, without a trace. It started subtly, with rumors passing through the town square about a missing boy. A week later, a little girl failed to return from school. By the time the third child disappeared, Ventnor's usual calm was shattered. Holly Arnold, a local journalist, had lived on the isle her entire life. She knew the island like the back of her hand, the rugged coastlines, the dense woodlands, and the abandoned quarries that dotted the landscape. It was home, and despite its rural isolation, it had always felt safe. That was until the disappearances started. Each night, the island was gripped with fear as darkness fell, and the streets emptied earlier than ever. Parents kept their children indoors, the playgrounds eerily empty. And then there was the figure, the only lead in the case. Several people had reported seeing someone standing just outside the town, near the tree line that bordered the sprawling Ventnor woods. No one could describe the figure in detail. Some said it was a man, others weren't sure. The only consistent detail was the tall, shadowy silhouette that appeared at the edge of the woods when dusk settled over the town. Holly, driven by equal parts professional curiosity and personal fear, couldn't shake the feeling that something deeply unnatural was at play. She had covered Ventnor's small news beat for years, but this was different. There were no leads, no demands, no ransom notes. It was as if the children had simply been swallowed by the island itself. It was a rainy Thursday night when Holly decided she needed to investigate the woods. Armed with her camera, flashlight, and a notebook, she drove to the edge of town. The narrow road twisted between the cliffs and the dark forest that stretched like a gnarled hand across the horizon. As she stepped out of the car, the cold wind whipped her face, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the salty tang of the sea. The woods ahead loomed large, an impenetrable mass of black trunks and tangled underbrush. A deep sense of foreboding settled over her as she crossed the old stone wall that bordered the woods. She clicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the dense fog that had settled in the low-lying areas. The ground squelched beneath her boots, the air thick with the sound of raindrops pattering against the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a child's voice. It was faint, almost a whisper on the wind. Holly's heart raced. The deeper she ventured into the woods, the more the familiar sounds of nature faded away. The wind seemed to die, the rustle of the leaves growing fainter. Even the rain seemed muted, as if the forest itself absorbed every sound. Holly glanced at her watch. It was nearing midnight. She was about to turn back when she spotted something between the trees. There, just ahead, stood the figure. It was tall, impossibly so, its elongated body almost blending into the shadows. It stood still, watching her from just beyond the reach of her flashlight's beam. Holly's breath caught in her throat as she raised her camera, snapping a picture. The flash illuminated the figure for only a split second, but what she saw chilled her to the bone. It had no face. A blank, featureless expanse stared back at her, where eyes and a mouth should have been. Holly stumbled backward, her foot catching on a tree root. The flashlight slipped from her grip, and darkness enveloped her. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering in her chest, and fumbled for the light. When she finally found it and turned it on, the figure was gone. Shaking, Holly pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. She could still hear that faint voice, calling her deeper into the forest. The terrain grew rougher, the trees thicker. And then through a break in the branches, she saw it a clearing. In the center stood a circle of ancient stones, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. In the middle of the circle, a gaping hole yawned open, descending into the earth like a black abyss. Holly approached cautiously. The air around the pit was cold, unnaturally so, and a sense of malevolence radiated from its depths. As she peered over the edge, she saw movement, small hands reaching up from the darkness, the pale faces of the missing children staring back at her. Their eyes were wide, pleading, but their mouths remained shut, as if something was holding them silent. A voice, low and guttural, echoed from the pit. "They belong to me now," Holly gasped. She turned to run, but standing at the edge of the clearing was a faceless figure. It moved toward her, its elongated limbs bending at unnatural angles. Holly's mind raced as she realized the truth. This figure, this thing, had been taking the children, drawing them into the earth where they would be forever trapped. But why? Before she could react, the ground beneath her feet began to shift, the earth softening as if it had turned to liquid. Holly's legs sank into the soil, and no matter how hard she struggled, it pulled her deeper. The faceless figure drew closer, its featureless face now inches from hers. "But you've seen too much." Holly screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The faceless figure reached out, its hand cold and damp, grasping her wrist. In an instant, the world went black. Days passed. The search for Holly Arnold swept across the island, but like the children, she was never found. The townsfolk whispered about the strange figure in the woods, but no one dared to investigate further. The disappearances stopped, and life in Ventnor slowly returned to its usual quiet routine. But some nights, when the fog rolls in and the moon hangs low over the cliffs, if you stand at the edge of Ventnor woods, you might see a figure standing just beyond the trees, tall, featureless, and watching. Waiting. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faint whispers of children carried on the wind, calling out from the depths of the earth, forever lost in the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight, though it resumed its eerie calm, never truly forgot the mystery of the missing children. Rumors swirled like the coastal mists, casting an unsettling pall over Ventnor. The townsfolk, especially the parents, never let their children stray far, and though the disappearances had ceased, a new fear took root that the figure in the woods still watched, biding its time. A month after Holly's disappearance, strange things began happening again. At first, they were small, almost dismissible doors left ajar, toys found in places they shouldn't be. Parents thought they were merely overreacting, their minds playing tricks on them in the wake of the tragedies. But then came the laughter. Soft, playful giggles heard in the dead of night when no children were awake. Some families reported hearing footsteps outside their windows, like tiny feet scampering across the gravel paths. The more superstitious whispered that the missing children had returned, but not in the way anyone had hoped. A year passed. The town slowly began to heal, though scars from the losses remained. That was when Emily Townsend, Holly's closest friend, found herself unable to shake the feeling that Holly wasn't truly gone. Emily was a primary school teacher in the neighboring town of Shanklin, just a short drive from Ventnor. She and Holly had shared a close bond, both born and raised on the island, and had spent many afternoons exploring its woods and cliffs as children. When Holly vanished, Emily was devastated, but more than that, she was consumed by guilt. Holly had confided in her about her suspicions about the figure in the woods, but Emily had dismissed it as stress and overwork. Now, she couldn't help but wonder if she had let her best friend walk into something far worse than either of them had imagined. One evening, while Emily sat in her small cottage overlooking the sea, she received an email from an unknown address. The subject line was blank, but the content chilled her. It was a photograph, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. The image was of Holly standing at the edge of Ventnor woods, staring blankly into the trees. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glassy, as though she had been caught mid-step, lured into the depths of the forest. Emily stared at the screen, her heart pounding. There was no message, no explanation, just the image of her friend alive, but trapped in some unspeakable fate. Emily knew what she had to do. The next morning, she packed a small bag with essentials: a flashlight, a thermos of tea, her phone, and a notebook. She drove to Ventnor, parking her car at the edge of town where the woods began. As she stood at the entrance to the forest, the chill of the autumn air wrapped around her like a shroud. The trees seemed denser now, more forbidding than she remembered. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by the faint sound of the sea crashing against the cliffs in the distance. With a deep breath, Emily stepped into the woods. The path twisted and turned, the underbrush thick and unruly. She retraced Holly's steps as best she could, following the directions her friend had mentioned before she disappeared. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, just beyond the reach of her flashlight's beam. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Emily had been walking in circles for what felt like an eternity, each clearing looking the same, each tree more twisted and gnarled than the last. Just as despair began to settle over her, she heard the unmistakable sound of children laughing. It was faint, distant, but it was real. She quickened her pace, moving toward the sound. The laughter grew louder, accompanied by the rustling of leaves, as if small feet were running through the forest. Then, through the trees, she saw the clearing. The same ancient stones Holly had described in her notes stood in a circle, and at the center, the pit remained, dark and foreboding. Emily approached cautiously, her heart racing. As she neared the stones, she saw something move, small figures dotting between the trees at the edge of the clearing. Children. The missing children. Their faces were pale, their clothes tattered, but they moved with an eerie grace, their eyes wide and unblinking. They circled the pit, their laughter a hollow echo that sent chills down Emily's spine. She called out to them, but they didn't respond. Instead, they continued their strange dance around the pit, as if bound by some unseen force. And then she saw her Holly. Her friend stood on the far side of the clearing, her eyes fixed on Emily. But something was wrong. Holly's expression was blank, her movements stiff and unnatural. She didn't seem to recognize Emily at all. Emily shouted, her voice breaking the oppressive silence of the woods. "It's me, Emily. I'm here to help you." Instead, she slowly turned her head toward the pit, and Emily followed her gaze. From the depths of the pit, something began to rise. The air grew colder, the wind whipping through the trees with a violent force. A dark figure emerged, taller than any human, its form twisted and grotesque. It had no face, just like the figure Holly had described. It stood at the edge of the pit, towering over the children, its long arms reaching out as if to claim them once again. Emily stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the same strange pull that Holly had described in her final notes. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating, its faceless head turning toward Emily. "No," she screamed. "I won't let you take them." She fumbled for the thermos in her bag, unscrewing the lid with shaking hands. The contents a mix of holy water and salt, prepared in a frantic call with the local priestess lodged inside. She had no idea if it would work, but it was all she had. With a primal scream, Emily hurled the contents toward the figure. The water sprayed across its black form, and for a moment the air crackled with energy. The figure recoiled, a low, inhuman growl vibrating through the clearing. The children froze, their laughter stopping abruptly as the dark presence shrank back toward the pit. For a moment, Emily thought she had won. But then, the ground beneath her feet cracked open, a deep fissure spreading from the pit. The earth seemed to suck in everything around it, pulling the stones, the trees, and the children toward the dark chasm. Holly was the last to be drawn in. As she was pulled toward the pit, her eyes locked onto Emily's, and for the first time there was recognition. "Emily, help me," and then the pit closed with a thunderous roar, leaving the clearing silent once more. Emily collapsed to the ground, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face. She had failed. But as the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, a sense of peace settled over the woods. The children were gone, the figure banished, at least for now. Emily knew the island would never be the same. Neither would she. But the vanishing children of the Isle of Wight had been claimed by something far older and darker than anyone could understand, and Emily was left with the chilling certainty that it would not rest for long. Some day it would return, and next time it would be even hungrier. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.